Hey, Shalom, Akim, Shalom, Kahala, Yahweh, Bashim, Yahushua, Bashim, Kakadash, Pakatham, I send double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone. Much peace, love, and salutations to you, Akim, out there pushing the word in sincerity and truth. This is Brother Ariala. This lesson is just a response to a question that one of the brothers have put out there about servants obeying their masters and the mindset in the New Testament about slavery in general and what we see as far as just like slavery in the Bible. Um, we have to understand that there was a dynamic during the Roman Empire of slavery, and there was a large influx of people, Israelites who had land, who had slaves, or they were like employers. They had slaves, and then you also had servants or slaves that were coming into the truth. So you had people who had slaves coming into the truth that were Israelites, and then you had people who were slaves coming into the truth that were Israelites. And a lot of the New Testament scriptures were addressing both of that. So when you read here in Ephesians 6 and 5, it says, Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling, and singleness of your heart, as unto Hamashiach Yahushua. Not with eye service as man pleases, but as servants of Hamashiach, doing the will of the Most High from the heart, with goodwill doing service as to the Lord, not to men. So basically, it's telling, like Paul is exhorting those people who are in these houses, hey, do what you need to do, grind, build, because the scriptures it's a revolutionary doctrine. It's telling you that there's a new kingdom coming. You ain't got to worry about all this. You need to chill, all this and that. And so Paul is exhorting people who are in the households with masters to make sure that they just do what they need to do, be good at what you do, be exemplary in your lifestyle, regardless of your situation. And that's what we tell brothers to do even now. Like you're at your job, you got certain things going on in your life. Listen, just be on point, and it will make everything better in the long run. Because whenever you go the extra mile in doing your daily duties as far as your job and everything like that, it just makes things easier in the long run. And that's the mindset that Paul was explaining. Now, I want to read this right here. This is in BibleOdyssey.org. It says, Slavery in the New Testament. It says, slavery in the Roman Empire was a fact of life. Most people could not imagine a society without slaves. Some people spoke out against the mistreatment of slaves, and there were slave revolts, but no abolitionist movement existed. And that's not necessarily true in the Roman Empire. I mean, we read the story of Spartacus and everything like that. And the Greco-Roman Empire was filled with slave revolts. So when we read these passages of these Bible commentaries, we have to make sure that we keep a more well-rounded understanding of what we're reading. All right. The second paragraph says the fate of a slave depended largely on the temperament of his or her master. Masters could punish slaves brutally for real or perceived infractions. Sexual abuse of slaves was also common. Slave work included hard labor as well as skilled service like tutoring, bookkeeping, estate managing. Okay, when we read about stewardship, right? Masters often freed slaves, and for numerous reasons, including as a reward for obedience and loyalty. Written contracts, however, commonly enforced continued work by freed slaves for their former masters. A wide range of circumstances dictated whether a slave would be educated, illiterate, poor, wealthy, abused, or comfortable. New Testament writers lived in the Roman Empire and likewise adopted widespread attitudes about slaves. Some New Testament passages rely on negative stereotypes, such as slaves being lazy. Other passages use slavery as a metaphor for faithfulness. Paul calls himself a slave of Yahushua HaMashiach as a sign of devotion. Yahushua compares the impossible task of slaves serving two masters to followers who must choose between wealth and the Most High. All right, so I want to skip down. It says the most famous slave in the New Testament epistles is Onesimus, the slave of Philemon. In a short letter, Paul implores Philemon to receive Onesimus as a beloved brother. And so these type of situations, like this situation that we're talking about right now in Philemon, was actually a situation that was very, very common in Judea, where you had Jake that was well-to-do, who had other Hebrew slaves in his crib, serving and doing whatever they need to do. Okay, so a lot of times when we read these scriptures on slaves and masters, we're reading about these type of situations that Paul was trying to make sure bros figured out. Okay, it says whether Paul intended freedom for Onesimus as a matter of debate, because Paul never explicitly requests his freedom. Paul wasn't thinking about none of that. Paul came from a very well-to-do family. Very, very likely that Paul's family had Hebrew slaves. Okay? So when we read these Bible commentaries, see, so-called white people feel so guilty about chattel slavery that it influences their understanding of slavery in general, or what we call slavery. So when you read these Bible commentaries, it's a lot of apologetic sentiment that they put into the breakdown. Paul wasn't thinking about no slaves like that. Paul understood slavery. Paul was chilling. Paul was teaching. That's it. He didn't feel no type of way. He was teaching from what he understood and what he knew about what was going on. Okay? So when you hear these type of things, you have to know, when you read these type of things, you have to know that it's like, it's the so-called white person that feels some type of way. Okay? Slavery is not like Negro chattel slavery, where people were getting raped, beaten with like you don't know where you came from. That's not how slavery was back then. Like, the reason why so-called white people feel so guilty about slavery is because the way that they conducted slavery was ridiculously inhumane. And recorded history does not record slavery as being that way, even in the Roman Empire. And in the Roman Empire had brutal slavery because it was Edomites. Very, very brutal slavery. But there's nothing that compares to Negro chattel slavery. It's only that, like, Negro chattel slavery is unprecedented. Never in the history of mankind has slavery really went down that way. And I need bros to understand that. So when we hear the word slavery in the Bible, Negro chattel slavery is not normal in world history. Even the history of our slavery in Egypt, even our captivity in Babylon and Persia, Greece, even when they was making us eat pork and killing us, nothing compared to Negro chattel slavery. Nothing. So when we understand the mindset of masters and servants in the New Testament, it was a more of an employer-employee mindset. Now, were there cruel masters? Absolutely. Absolutely. There was cruel masters. But it was still more of a employer. You go to work and you got your boss. Okay? Now, was it more intricate? Yes. But I'm saying this for bros to get an overall understanding. Okay? And I hope this is edifying. I hope that makes sense. Right? Now, when you go back into this paragraph, I'm here. If you can see my pointer, I said whether Paul intended freedom from Onesimus is a matter of debate because Paul never explicitly requests his freedom. Other New Testament letters forcibly instructed slaves to obey their masters because they're smart. Some passages tell masters to treat slaves better, an indication that some Christians treat their slaves poorly. Okay? Slaves appear occasionally as minor characters of the gospel, blah, 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 blah. That's really the point I want to make on that. Now, when we read here, Colossians 3, let's start at 18. No, we don't even have to go there. Let's go. Okay, Colossians 3 and 22. Servants, obey in all things your masters according to the flesh, not with eye service as man pleasers, but in singleness of heart, fearing the Most High. And whatsoever ye do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not unto men, knowing that of the Lord ye shall receive the reward of the inheritance, for ye serve the Lord Hamashiach Yahushua. Right? This is a mindset. And a lot of this stuff was coupled with a master that believed that Yahushua was a savior and you were in that household. Now, when you get to the scriptures that talk about eating of food sacrificed unto idols, we have to understand the context because there was a lot of Israelites that were serving in households with idol worshippers, and the food that was prepared for the servants of the house was food sacrificed unto idols. Okay? So if you live in a household and the food that's prepared, it's just like your kid is on free lunch and the free lunch is provided by the school, and let's say the school is, Hamburger Fridays, but the Hamburger Fridays is food sacrificed unto idols, right? Like, you have to understand that the kid that's getting the free lunch, he just eating the hamburger, bro. He don't believe in Baal. He just wants some food. So these type of situations was going on, and Paul had to address it. It was a lot of dynamic situations going on that came under the umbrella of Paul and the apostleships, people traveling to these different places. Slavery and people believing in these different houses is one of many things that was going on, right? So I'm here in theologyofwork.org, and one of the sections that they have is slave and masters, ancient and contemporary, and they highlight this Colossians 3, right? It says, at this point, Colossians moves on to what is called a household code, a set of specific instructions to wives and husbands and children and parents, slaves and masters. These codes were common in the ancient world. In the New Testament, they occur in one form or another 6 times. Galatians 3:28, Ephesians 5:15, 6:9, Colossians 3:15, 4:1, 1 Timothy 5, right? Titus, 1 Peter. It says, for our purposes here, we will explore only the section of Colossians having to do with workplace, slaves and masters, right? If we are to appreciate fully the value of Paul's words here for contemporary workers, we need to understand a bit about slavery in the ancient world. Western readers often equate slavery in the ancient world with chattel slavery of the pre-Civil War South in the United States, a system notorious for its brutality and degradation. At the risk of oversimplification, we might say that the slave system of the ancient world was both similar to and different from the former U.S. system. On one hand, in ancient times, foreign captors of war laboring minds were arguably far worse off than slaves in the American South. At the other extreme, however, some slaves were well educated, valued members of the household, serving as physicians, teachers, and estate managers. And we see that example in the scriptures all the time. Jacob. Was not Jacob a slave? Jacob was a slave, brothers. He was a slave to the house of Laban. He worked those fields. He worked to get Rachel and Leah. Okay? And there's several examples of I want to use is it Eleazar? There's so many examples in the scriptures of people in the scriptures that served their Hebrew master's house so well that they even received the daughter of the owner of the house. Okay? So we have to understand, like, there's a different dynamic to slavery. And that's why we see the example of Joseph. We see the example of Moses. We see the example of Daniel. These slaves. Daniel was a slave. Daniel, that you read in the Bible, was a slave. Okay? But he rose up to be a president of provinces, right? So we have to understand that there's this deep dynamic that leads into the New Testament and what we're reading about in slaves and masters and houses and people that are being converted into the gospel. Okay? It says, but we all were considered to be their master's property, so that even a household slave could be subject to horrific treatment with no necessary legal recourse. Now, here's the part I want y'all to understand. What relevance does Colossians 3:18, 4 and 1 have for workers today? Much as working for wages or a salary is the dominant form of labor in developed countries today, slavery was the dominant form of labor in the Roman Empire. Many slaves worked in jobs we could recognize today as occupations, receiving food, shelter, and often a modicum of comforts in return. Slaveholders' power over their slaves was similar in some respects to much more extreme than the power that employers or managers have over workers today. The general principles Paul puts forward concerning slaves and masters in this letter can be applied to modern managers and employers, provided we adjust for the significant differences between our situation now and theirs then. Okay, so what he's trying to explain right here is that when we read these scriptures about slaves and masters, we can kind of equate in our mind your boss. You're the lead manager at your job, or the person that owns the company, how he treats his employees, and how you have some people who own businesses that are very nice to their employees, and then you have some people who own businesses that treat their employees like crap. Same thing with managers and stuff like that. And that's the in likeness. You see that in the scriptures where the scriptures talk about, masters being kind to their servants and servants simply obeying their masters. That's what we're reading about. We had these dynamic situations, even to the point to where you had believing masters. 1 Timothy 6:2 says, "And they that have believing masters, let them not despise them, because they are brethren, but rather do them service because they are faithful and beloved, partakers of the benefit. These things teach and exhort." Okay? So, in those ancient times, you had people who owned land and estates, that had people working those lands and estates. The person that owned the land believed in Yahweh Shem Yahushai. The person that was working the land for them believed in Yahweh Shem Yahushai. So how to conduct business for that person's house that owned or had employees had to be talked about, had to be understood. For a person that was a servant, hey, do the best you can. Don't be no whole ass nigga. You serving your master, but we know ultimately you waiting on Yahweh Shem Yahushua. But be mindful. Don't just be no rebellious dude at your job because you know the Lord is coming. This is what Paul is exhorting. Don't get yourself killed on some BS. But then Paul saying at the same time was exhorting believers who had employees, who had servants, saying, hey, don't be cruel to your servants. Like, bro, let them make it. Make the best of what y'all got going on over there. So that's what you had going on during the time of the New Testament. It was a dynamic. There was so many different dynamics of maybe you had a person who owned land and stuff that was an idol worshiper. So you working in this dude's house, you didn't want to get killed. You had to be mindful. You ain't just be bucking up and you're going to get your whole family killed. But then you had other situations where you had people who own lands and they believed in Yahweh Shem Yahushua, and you worked underneath them, and you had to work it out so everything could be most efficient as possible through the Spirit. Okay, so I just wanted to bring that out, brother Elder Yeshua brought it up to me, and you know, there's so many Bible commentaries on this topic. You can look it up all day, but you know that's the overall mindset. To understand whenever you're reading these scriptures, to know that it was a dynamic thing. You had believing masters, you had servants who believed, and then sometimes you had situations where you had a master with unbelieving servants, and then certain situations where you had unbelieving master with believing servants, and so everybody had to move according to the Spirit. Okay, so Lord Woodland was edifying. If there's more information that brothers have, please post it in the comment board or post scriptures. Call halal Yahweh Bashim Yahushua Bashim Kodash. Double honors to the apostle and elders, a great millstone. Much peace, love, and salutations to you. I came out there pushing the word in sincerity and truth. Shalom.